that's why we will start our morning session. Today, co-chairs are me, Professor Severenko Anatoly, Technical University of Moldova, and Professor Balash. Yes, so now we will start to work. The first talk today will be presented by Stefan Schröder. Stefan Schröder, Franz Fauken. Stefan is co-author. Yes. Franz Fauken. The title you can read: Nanocomposites and polymers in films, from gas phase synthesis to functional application. Please, you're welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. It gives me really great pleasure to be here in Moldavia for the very first time. I'm highly honored to give this plenary talk here. Although we cooperate with Oleg Lupan over there since many years, and the first cooperation between PL and Moldova goes back to more than 20 years. Professor Tiginiano visited Professor Föll, about 20 years ago. Let me start my talk. The title is Nanocomposites and Polymers in Films, from gas phase synthesis to functional applications. And various people listed here contributed to the results I presented. Functional nanocomposites, the way we investigate them, are either particulate composites or multi-layer structures. And for the particulate composites, today I will show you how we produce the particles via gas phase aggregation sources, and how we deposit the matrix via initiated chemical vapor deposition. I will discuss various functional applications in plasmonics, in photocatalysis, memristive devices, and sensors. I start with particulate composites. The particulate composites we are producing and interested in consist of metallic particles in a dielectric matrix. And in order to take advantage of the functional properties, it's very important to go to high filling factors. So we make sure that the particles are in very close contact to each other, so we have nano gaps between the particles, and the interaction across these nano gaps, this is what determines the functional properties. To get such a structure, it's very important to have full control over the particle filling factor, over the size of the particles, but also the composition. In the example here, I show a ternary metallic nanoparticle which we can produce with good control of the composition. Different from other approaches, we aim for a very broad particle size distribution to shift the population threshold to high values and to get close contact between the particles. The typical approach we use is physical vapor deposition, because wet chemical approaches don't allow you to have such a very good control over the structure. High filling factors and full control of the composition of the particles is almost impossible to achieve with wet chemical approaches. So what we do is we have two deposition sources, one for the matrix and one for the particles, and then we simultaneously deposit the matrix and particles on the substrate. And the principal idea is like formation of water drops on the Teflon pan. The metal doesn't wet the substrate, and as a consequence it forms nanoparticles on the surface, and these particles are embedded into the growing matrix. We have different approaches for the deposition of the matrix. Today I will mostly focus on initiated chemical vapor deposition for organic matrices, but we also use sputtering, for instance, for ceramic matrices. For the metallic source, we use the usual techniques like evaporation, sputtering, etc. But to get full control of the particle size and independently control of filling factor and particle size, we also use cluster sources, and this is what I will focus on today mostly. Okay. It stopped. It worked before. Okay. Okay, now. In such cluster sources, we use magnetron sputtering, a technique you are probably familiar with. We have a metallic substrate, and from the substrate we bring by sputtering atoms into the gas phase, and then we have a very high pressure of inert argon gas, and under these conditions we have a very high collision probability between the gas atoms and the metallic particles, and we form clusters which are deposited on the substrate. With this approach we can form the clusters under inert conditions, so we don't have reactions between cluster and matrix, and we can, as I mentioned earlier, control filling factor and particle size independently, and we achieve quite high deposition rates. What we recently investigated is an approach to in situ control the composition of the particles. So we use a composite target, in this case silver gold for instance, and we control the width of the sputter trench by application of a magnetic field, which we vary by varying the magnets or also varying the pressure in the chamber. And this is how we can achieve full control of the composition of the particles, as recently highlighted also in nanotechnology. The person in my group who is responsible for this particle deposition is Alexander Wahl. He also works on wristed devices, which I will show you later. We also have full control by monitoring the formation of the particles with optical spectroscopies like UV-vis spectroscopy. We can get information on the concentration of species in the gas phase, but we also follow by observing the plasma resonance how the particles form, and we also can monitor the alloy composition in case of alloy particles. We are also interested in the formation mechanism of the particles in the gas phase, and here we use laser scattering in connection with my colleague Holger Kersten in Kiel, and we also use X-ray scattering at the synchrotron. Here's an example how these particles look like. By varying the magnetron power, we can control the size and other parameters of the particle. And what I show you here are aluminum particles which show a very pronounced plasma resonance in the UV, which is somewhat unusual. Usually we are interested in visible plasmonics. We use this for photocatalysis, and I will go into this in more depth later. We also use our clusters in cooperation with Oleg Lupan and Rainer Adelung. We heard a lot already about sensors, semiconductor sensors, and we deposit these particles with full control of size and alloy composition and other parameters to tailor the selectivity and sensitivity of these semiconductor clusters. Here's an example. Big issue in sensors is cross-sensitivity to moisture, and the example I've chosen here are battery sensors. This is again a cooperation with Lupan. And in order to get rid of this cross-sensitivity, we deposit an ultra-thin layer of polymer, a highly water-repelling polymer. In this case, this is a PV3D3 polymer. And this already brings me to my next topic, ICVD of organic thin films. ICVD, initiated chemical vapor deposition, that is a technique which is analogous to wet chemical production of polymer films by initiated free radical polymerization. But here, the polymerization occurs from the gas phase. We deposit monomers which absorb on the substrate, and in order to start the chain reaction, we use initiators pretty much the same as in wet chemistry. These initiators pass a hot filament, and then free radicals are formed which are deposited on the substrate and starts the chain reaction. The advantage of this approach, which was invented at MIT some years ago by Karen Gleason, with whom we also cooperate, the advantage is that we don't need solvents and that we have a conformal deposition, which has various advantages. Also, it works at low substrate temperature and we have a precise thickness control. Stefan Schröder, who will also give a talk on Friday, is in charge of this field in my group. He runs the young scientist group. Yeah, the advantage of ICVD is that different from plasma polymerization, for instance, you preserve the chemical structure of the deposited polymers fully. Here you see a Raman spectrum for Teflon, which was deposited by ICVD. And compared to conventional polymers, these ICVD polymers have an extremely low defect density, and this gives rise to a very high dielectric breakdown strength, shown on the left. And this means you can charge up these polymer films up to very high voltages without dielectric breakdown. And this we use for electrode applications. For charging up, we use, for instance, a corona discharge, and then we can design electrodes. This is the counterpart to magnets, to permanent magnets. These materials contain permanent electrical charges and have various applications in MEMS technology, in electric microphones, and several other fields. And the electrodes produced by ICVD are superior to conventional ones. Well, first of all, they can be produced also as thin films. You don't need foils or more macroscopic electrodes. And as shown here, the stability, the charge stability is much higher as in conventional systems. Stefan Schröder designs these electric materials and other PVD polymers not only empirically. He uses density functional approximation to really tune these materials. I mentioned already the various applications. One application is also, because you can also cause porous structure to produce superhydrophobic materials. Here's an example. In this case, this was simply porous titania, so very simple structure coated with Teflon. And what you can see here, it's extremely water repellent, even under high pressures. Recently, there's much interest in conductors for soft robotics, which should be extremely soft. But one huge problem with those structures is that the resistivity depends on the strain, and together with a group of Rainer Adelung, we developed strain invariant soft conductors. The idea is here to use these well-known tetrapodal structures, which are coated by a conducting polymer, and then on top by ICVD Teflon film is put on top, and this prevents that upon straining the arms, if they touch each other, change the resistivity of the structure. This was recently also highlighted in Advanced Functional Materials. Here's the team that developed the structure. We also developed photoswitchable organic devices. Here the idea is to incorporate into the ICVD structure upon evaporation photoswitchable molecules which can make a cis-trans transition reversibly by photoswitching. And here you can switch many properties. Here on the right I should show a diagram where the optical properties were switched, but we also use this for switching other properties. And we also design photoswitchable actuators, and one can also use this for drug release, for instance, by using hydrogels, which are cross-linked via such photoswitchable polymers. Max Borg was the one who worked in this field. What is, at least I find particularly exciting, is the opportunity to develop copolymers. And you don't have the boundaries of wet chemical approaches where you need a coupled solvent. So you can essentially combine any two monomers to a copolymer. And what is also interesting is that you can tailor the composition on the nanoscale. Here's one example. In order to combine ICVD with MEMS technology and silicon-based technologies, here's an example where on the one side of the polymer we have good adhesion to the silicon matrix, and then we go within only 13 nanometers all the way to a highly water-repelling structure. But this can not only be used for adhesion promotion, also this is an important practical application. It can also be used to generate gradients in chemical and physical structures for various applications. This was also recently highlighted as a cover of materials today. Yeah, before I come to the next topic, I should mention that this is not only interesting for fundamental research, but Stefan Schröder and his team are also in the process of founding a company based on that. Yeah, now I will come to photocatalysis. I think photocatalysis is known to everybody. The principle is shown on the right. You usually use wide bandgap semiconductors. Titanium would be the workhorse for that. And the photogenerated charge carriers, which are in a highly excited state, they can be used for water splitting, for instance. We are mostly interested in cleaning air and water purification. Titanium is known for a long time as a photocatalyst. We have several ways to improve the properties. One is to introduce a nanocrack structure to get a very large effective surface, but other approach is to use plasmonics. In this case, we don't use optical plasmonics, but plasmonics in the UV regime. The idea is to tune the plasmonic resonance to the UV source to strongly enhance the decomposition. And one example is shown in the middle. We used methylene blue as material to show the decomposition behavior. The blue curve is an optimized structure with plasmonic resonance compared to the black one of the original structure. We don't use only plasmonic concepts, we also use other concepts where metallic nanoparticles, but sometimes also oxide nanoparticles are involved. An example is shown on the right. Here, in all these approaches, the main idea is after generation of the charge carriers, we want to effectively prevent recombination by trapping the charge carriers on metallic or oxide nanoparticles. Sali Visiroglu and Cenk Aktaş are the young scientists in my group. Cenk Aktaş is not so young anymore, he's already independent professor in Turkey who work on this. We also use photocatalysis for photocatalytic deposition. This is very interesting. You have a large variety of structures you can produce, and compared to other approaches where you have an extremely good adhesion of the deposited structures on almost any photocatalytic material. Here is an example. The structures you can generate go from structures which have very sharp tips, also to spherical structures. We can vary the concentration, we can produce alloys, and the idea is quite simple. You use metal which in solution which is reduced by photocatalytic reduction. Here's an example of gold in the structure shown here, but as I said, we can also produce alloys, and because it's a photoreduction, you can pattern your structures. Here's a schematic example. And we combine this also with our ICVD approach to get surfaces. In this case, we produced a metallic rough structure, which is highly water repellent and selective, allows selective absorption of oil by using an ICVD coating and the rough surfaces produced by photodeposition. the PhD student Joshua Shondu was involved in this project. The photocatalytic deposition can also be used to produce structures which enormously enhance the sensitivity of SARS, surface-enhanced Raman scattering. This is a technique I guess most of you are familiar with. It can be produced for detecting trace analysis. The idea in our approach is, the idea was already reported about 5 years ago in the literature, but we meanwhile came up with an approach where we really get a huge enhancement of SARS by this technique. So we again use titanium oxide structures. We introduce a nanocrack network as shown before to increase the surface, and then we deposit photocatalytically, particularly silver structures. And silver is a plasmonic material, like in classical SARS. You have a strong plasmonic enhancement of the incoming light intensity in so-called hot spots. This is well known in the literature, but different from classical SARS, we now activate our substrate by UV light. And this gives a huge enhancement of the sensitivity, which is already high in SARS. The red curve shows in this particular example about 50 times enhancement of the signal. And what is very nice also for commercial applications, which we pursue currently, after usage you can shine intense UV light on the structure. The activation is only done with a very low intensity, and then you can use your SARS substrates about 20 times, and these are really expensive. So that's also commercially very interesting. The mechanisms are not yet fully understood, but the idea is that at the interface between silver and titanium you form vacancies, and these vacancies form states in the band gap. And then after UV activation, if you shine with a green laser for normal SARS, electrons are excited into the conduction band, and there's also a charge transfer to the analyte involved, which gives rise to this huge enhancement of the signal. Here are the people involved, and this was also highlighted in Small recently. And meanwhile, we also got seed money from Kiel University to initiate a study.
So 1 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, millimeter carrier moving is needed. So good charge collection is also very important. But this kind of the diamond is so expensive, and so we can get a small volume of the diamond only. So heterogeneous diamond, it is a moderate charge collection. So we can get a large volume diamond. So this view graph shows us our growth technique of the step flow growth. So by using sapphire, we use a sapphire step substrate like this. We use a step substrate. Usually we use 0.1 or 0.5 degrees step substrate. So and then we put the illusion buffers like seconds. So and then we deposit the growth diamond like so. So we use illusion buffer. So by using this illusion buffer, when diamond growing, so we use high temperature. So but after that, we decrease the temperature. So automatically, diamond is stress on the diamond is in the right direction. So we can get only diamond material from this method. So this method is already published in the applied physics experiments in 2 years ago. So in this case, sufficient reductions in the production time and the cost suitable for the mass production. So this is a picture of the 2-inch diamond, a little bit older. So now we can get the recently, so we can get the 2-inch diamond warehouse with low nitrogen concentration. So by contamination of the nitrogen, so the diamond is becomes yellow or dark. So, but now with success with light, 4 millimeter by 4 millimeter, so transparency. So for the detector fabrications, so we use gold electrode for the gold is for the electrode. So by using photolithography, so the gold electrode size is a little bit smaller than for the heterodyne diamond. Because of the shortage of the metal, so make some leakages. So and so we make both sides gold epitheal diamond and gold. Okay, so this picture shows test detector module, but only as wiring on the PC. So in this case, we use 4 millimeter by 4 millimeter by 0.56 detectors. So we use gamma ray source, so barium 133, so cesium, so 137, and cobalt 60. So and alpha ray source, as alpha ray source, we use americium 241, and we apply this bias voltage for diamond. So the voltage is 100 to 500. So shaping is a little bit special technique for the detection in the radiation detector. So please see the diagram. So source means the gamma ray, alpha rays absorbed on the diamond detector. So diamond detector generates a hole and electron pair. So and we use charge sensitive amplifier. So because of that charge is very small, so charge sensitive amplifier convert to the small current. Small current means the number of the charge to the voltage. So and we use digitizer and PC. So in the digitizer and PC, so we use some shaping and shaping and so on. So that measurement means operated in the air. So this is an energy spectrum on the gamma ray. So unfortunately we cannot find a clear peak from the barium, cesium, cobalt 60. However, we can find some change of the highest point. Black one is the dark current, from a dark current. So highest means maybe 100 and so on. So blue line is the highest value, is 150. Cesium is 60, 62. So cobalt is maybe 500 to 600. So it's related to this highest point and the energy of the gamma. So it is not so good, but we can get some result, energy detection result from the diamond detector. So this figure is stability of this kind of detector in the long time operation. So long time means 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So the black line is 5 minutes to 50 minutes. 10 minutes measurement is 5 minutes to 50 minutes. So after that, we measure the red line. So 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Almost same lines we can get. So because I and my team studied the cadmium telluride, very popular material for the radiation detector, cadmium telluride detector. But in that case, maybe 10 minutes, so we can find the degradation of the this curve. So like so shift to the lower channel and so peak with the decrease. So it means so charge correction is charging correction is regulated with the time. So in the cadmium period. So but in diamond, so in the diamond, so we cannot find so any kind of degradations. So this is one of the result of the charge transportations. So in this case, so we use cesium 137. So we can get this kind of energy spectrum, not so good spectrum, but so a highest point of the data is changing here. So by changing the bias voltage, so higher when we apply the high bias voltage, high means so minus 500. So we can obtain the shift to the higher positions. So by using these data, we can make this kind of maximum pulse height means the highest point is changed by like this. So black one is the real data. So by using this data, so we can get this data. So by using this data, so we can calculate the mu tau. In this case, mu tau whole is 8 point by 10 to the minus 6 centimeter square per volt by using Hecht equations. So that equation, so usually we use Hecht equation for the mu tau calculation. Unfortunately, so in the opposite side, we usually calculate the mu tau electron. So but the small signal is so small and noisy, so we cannot get. So but the whole mu tau whole, so we can get these values. So by using the alpha ray, so alpha ray in the alpha ray case, so we get this kind of two kinds of results. So black one is alpha rays irradiated from the cathode side. So on cathode side, so because there was a hole is coming here. So not cut. So electron is generated. Electron profile is generated, and so hole. So we can obtain this kind of differences. So it means whole the carrier mobility of the hole and electron is little different. So hole is more higher. So electron is more lower. So we have to measure and calculate one. So and then we try to make X-ray imaging detector by using the photon charge counting type ASIC. So by using this kind of ASIC, so we can get not only the intensity but also the energy information at each pixels. So by using this this diagram. So at the detector generates the whole electron pair. But unfortunately, so we cannot make the capacitor on the detector. So therefore, the Q charge QQ is moved to the integrator. Integrator has large capacitors. So we use the large integrator as a large capacitor, as a large capacitors. So and then we make the very small charges, and so charge injection circuit is here. So we can know how many time charge injection is also comparator output is 0 value. So this kind of step. So how many steps means how energy of the one of the X-ray photons. So by using this circuit, so and by making before making a detector, so we check the as a single point detector like you were like previous my explanation. So we can get the this kind of parasynchrony. So it is okay for the making the imaging devices. Okay, this is a property of the imaging devices. That picture is maybe you can see the some beautiful diamond with small, very thin electrodes top electrodes, and many small electrodes put to the back side of the diamond. So in the diamond case, we can see directly this small silver bumps. So it is very easy to make this kind of detector. So detector, in this case, the detector is 3 meter by 3 meter and 500 micrometer thickness. So this ASIC is our special ASIC. It has 40 by 40 pixel with 80 micrometer pixel each. So there are 3.2 by 3.2 areas, so we can use it. Bias voltage is 1 minus 100. So and we have made our ASIC has so many kinds of threshold level. So but in this case, all of the electron and hole using for the imaging process. And we use two kinds of diamonds. One is experimental grade crystals. So and one is the red one is high quality crystals for images. So that is source is we use X-ray. So and we put very close to the X-ray sources. So this is original data from our radiation detector. So there are no corrections. So there was some fluctuation. So but we can get dark images left side and right side is right image is here. So average count is different. Maybe you can see. So it means this detector can detect the X-ray by uniform irradiations, no silhouettes. So this is the first data of our detector. So and by in this case, we use laboratory grade crystals. So laboratory testing just the growth of the dye. So and here is optimized grade high quality crystals. So in this case, no X-ray radiation, and so with X-ray radiation, we can find the difference from this kind of differences. Okay. So and so we use image lead plate like the right side images. That plate is made by the lead. So that is one of the test charts, hole and leads. Therefore, we can find this kind of black and white, black and white, black and white. So not so good results. So but first diamond imaging detector. So we can make this kind of thin material by using the lead, Japanese character E, because of our institute is established by this character. So by using that kind of detector, we put this E character is between the X-ray tube and this image. So we can get that kind of image. It's the first image, so not so good, but we can obtain this image from diamond, single diamond image detectors. Please compare this experimental grade and high quality grade. So like this. Okay, finally I will summarize my talk. So, radiation detectors is fabricated from heterogeneous diamond. So, and then we demonstrated 18 micron pitch X-ray images. So, we have to do so many things. So, but I want to show the news data in next. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Professor, for your nice presentation. Questions, please? Yes, please.
Listening to your talk, it occurred to me that is it possible to use this detector in a satellite, like Voyager or some space satellite? That would be an interesting application. Do you see it happening?
Thank you very much. Good question. Satellite, temperature is drastically change. And this material is very stable. So therefore, it's a good application. But now, we can only get to the 2 inches of diameter. So we have to get a more larger size. So in that case, it's a very good application. Thank you.
Other questions? If not, once again, thank you very much for your presentation. Now we go to the next presentation. Will be given by Professor Ashok Vasyashta, Washington, Director of Institute of Clean Water, and 15 years our collaborator, distinguished professor of Institute of Electronic Engineering and Nanotehnologies in Moldova, and last 2 years also distinguished professor at Brasov University, where he is working, and he will present very interesting results, summary of the big area which is with strategic integration of electrospinning and additive processing for smart and sustainable nanostructures. Please, dear colleague and our collaborator, Professor Ashok Vasyashta, please. Later, I propose that we will reduce the coffee break up to 10 minutes. Who would like to take coffee can separate, but we will work later on 20 minutes more and reduce coffee break to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Sidranto, for your introduction. Thank you, audience, for being here. And I know that I'm standing between now and the coffee break. So here are the results of an accidental discovery. Like I'm sure all of you know in science, we mostly have some accidental discoveries, and then that becomes suddenly your topic of research. My background is in medical biological science. And we used to make electrospinning to make different types of sensors. And we also had a 3D printing device. So as I will show you, that we accidentally connected these two, and it turns out that it led to many other pathways. So So here is the brief outline of the presentation. By the way, my collaborators, Professor Sidranto, Professor Nicolae, a couple of colleagues, those who were joining here, are from Turkey and also from Latvia, where I will be on a Fulbright fellowship starting next month through end of this year. So we have very strong collaboration with Riga Technical University, and part of the work is done in collaboration with that university as well. So here's a brief outline. The work which we did on e-textile, and as mentioned, most of my background is in sensing and detection. At Transylvania University of Russia, my appointment is with Civil Engineering Department. I'm not civil engineer, so obviously I have to find my background, how it fits into that. So we started working on critical infrastructure, and of course we have a NATO workshop next year on critical infrastructure monitoring. Biomedical application, this is the work which we do in Turkey. So I'll show you some of the results of that. Combining these two processes in terms of the functionality and by 3D printing, we were simply trying to provide mechanical support. Then of course I'll show you some of the e-textile audio results. Then we started adding lots of materials into polymers to make electrospinning. And PVDF at that point was one of them, and there are a few other materials which we use as dopant into the polymers, and I'll show you some of the initial experiments for that. And most of the applications we are using is for energy harvesting, because as we continue to depend on Internet of Devices, or IoTs, for example, they need to be powered. So we are trying to provide energy for these sensors using energy harvesting application of these membranes. So I'm going to briefly talk about that. Of course, using 3D printing, which is digital control fabrication for scaffold constructs for smart structure, structural health monitoring, biomedical application, precision micromanufacturing for rapid prototyping. And as we depend most on polymers, our effort is to reduce the polymer and proceed towards biopolymers so that there is less environmental impact of polymers as well. So I'll probably spend a slide on that as well. If the time should permit, which I don't think it will, we have a couple of programs of science convergence for technology acceleration. So I don't think I'll get to that, so we'll see as the time permits during the presentation. So as you know, we live in a highly connected world. Using my cell phone, I can monitor my little dog at the daycare center, how he's playing. I can turn my garage door on and off. I can also unautomatic remote pilot in command. So we have that drone. So from here, I can fly the drone, monitor different types of application, maybe agricultural, structural monitoring, and so forth. So it allows us those types of application. And this little circle that you see, that's your cell phone's application spectrum, because of the fact it has different types of capability. So that's essentially what it shows. So our idea has been to make more sensors with self-contained power harvesting application so that we have more and more IoTs going forward. And I'll show you some of the applications of that. So that being essentially the premise of my presentation. So we've been working on this for quite some time. On the left side, what you see is something which we had provided to Navy soldier centers in Boston, where they have enhanced situational awareness of soldiers in the battlefield. So we had provided these types of patches, which provide different applications in terms of tiredness of a soldier, how much work they have done, how much calories they have worked, and so forth. And of course, I'm sure lots of you have probably favorite, which continues to monitor our vitals. And of course, these also have transmission capability. And then we expanded that to e-textile for epidermal electronic systems and so forth. And what you see on the right side was a colleague of mine trying to add superconductor to polymers to see if we can make antennas, although independently we can make antennas. So that was also a spectrum of work which we tried to do. As I mentioned, more and more textile sensing we continue to work on. These are some of the typical production methods, and I'm sure perhaps you know about the cardiomobile type of a platform where you simply monitor your platform vitals using a touchpad. So what we're doing is consistent with the market, and that market trend is shown on the left. So this again is a spectrum of application going from health and medicine to agriculture. I showed you on the drone. These are types of application we are looking not only for critical infrastructure but also for agriculture. We also have the International Clean Water Institute where we have different sensor platforms at different locations. Using IoTs, we can monitor contaminants in water at different locations. And this is a project which was funded by NATO through Moldova, through Armenia, and a couple of other countries. So this is again a spectrum of application which we have looked into. This is the work which we do in Russia for critical infrastructure monitoring, where we can make different types of sensor platforms, and using vibration we can monitor at a different remote location if a building is sustainable, if something is not right with the building and so forth. So these are some of the devices which we make and insert into the building to monitor its functionality. People those who do civil engineering, you know that most of the time the non-destructive evaluation is done by different types of devices. But those devices can only be inserted where you could visually see. But using this, I can insert these devices at locations which are not easily accessible and still continue to monitor. So this is type of application it provides to us, so we continue to monitor. And I'll show you a couple of applications later on. This is the work which we do in Turkey, where it's essentially mostly biomedical types of application, such as placing physical barrier, especially at the time of surgery, so that there are no scar tissues and so forth. We can also make PCL scaffold for bone regeneration, statin placement, nerve regeneration, and so forth. Again, that simply shows the spectrum of application. But if you look at the conventional sensors, most of the sensors are induction-based. Again, they can be resistive, capacitive, piezoelectric, and so forth. But most of them are thick film types of devices which are inflexible. What we want to do is looking at the design characteristics, make flexible, lightweight, resistive, piezoresistive, capacitive, magnetic, and so forth, but still have the mechanical rigidity, and that's the reason we are trying to integrate electrospinning and 3D printing together. So that sort of shows us the motivation of the work which I'm going to present now. Electrospinning, perhaps if you have in your laboratory, you know it's a very inexpensive method. What you see on the left side is a mechanical spinning. My mother had that at home, where she would use a carbon and using mechanical rotator, you pull, and then obviously it will give you a fiber. And of course the application, I did not know that after growing up, I'll be making electrospinning. Fiber using electrospinning. But in electrospinning, as you know, you put polymer, apply electric field, and using the electrostatic force, these fibers proceed towards the electrode. And then you can make different types of application, membranes, and so forth. So it's a very simple apparatus, but nonetheless, we can put different types of dopants in there for different types of application. And some of the functionalities in the limited time I'll show you. We also have a As a matter of fact, I'll show you the following slide. So these are some of the conventional electrospinning techniques using a single syringe. We can use a coaxial syringe. We can use dual jet, and also here, as you know, that during the formation of electrospinning, there is a pillar cone, and these fibers tend to form a cone. So using electric field, I can narrow it down to a specific location, and then we can make different types of even circuits, 3D printing circuits based on this. And this is called 3D jet writing technique, so we also have that capability. So here's a table which, when I used to work with my own hands in the laboratory, we spent a couple of years trying to do different types of dopants, and these dopants are in different polymers, their composition, molecular weight, loading, and intended application. Later on, we extended this work by a postdoc in Turkey who uses turmeric, garlic, different types of tea nanoparticles for biomedical types of application. So we now have capability of adding all these nanomaterials using pharmaceutical types of application into polymers and make different application as I had shown before, statin placement and so forth, for drug delivery, even making physical barriers during the surgery as well, and to microbial, fungicidal, insecticidal types of applications, so we can make all of that. But the main problem is they do not have the mechanical rigidity, and that's the reason we need to integrate that with 3D printing. So here are some of the electrospinning methods which exist. Coaxial melt solution, solvent-free, near-field electrospinning. The apparatus which is shown by on-sheet laboratories, they were nice enough to acknowledge some of the work which we had done that led to the development of those machines. So as I mentioned, lots of techniques exist for making electrospinning method, electrospinning processes. But the main difficulty is they do not have the mechanical rigidity, and that's the reason we started using 3D/4D printing. The reason why we call 4D, because of the biological process as a function of time, it grows, and then that becomes a 4D process. These are some of the commonly used 3D printing. I'm sure most of you have in the laboratories, going from fused deposition to stereolithography, digital light processing, polyjet, photopolymer 3D printing, etc. And this is a work, not our work. This comes from a laboratory in Israel where they have made 3D printing arm using patient's cell. But most of our work is for biomedical application, for prosthetic arms and so forth, which I'll show you. But examples of 3D printing are shown on the left, going from dental to IVL to prosthetic, movie props, and so forth. So, as I mentioned, that we could add different nanomaterials into polymers for different functionality. Because of the fact these nanomaterials have large surface area, they produce different types of sensors, highly efficient sensors. And of course, since my background is in chemical and biological sensing, we can functionalize it for a specific receptor to capture a specific type of a chemical or biological agent. Again, same table, but simply to show that we have different types of capability. So recently, we started adding PVDF, polyvinyl dichloride, essentially for electric types of application, because I'm sure you know PVDF is piezoelectric. So simply by applying pressure on membranes, which are prepared using PVDF doped polymers, they would produce power, for example. If you apply mechanical power, then they would give you electricity. So some of the PVDF characteristics, I'm sure all of you know, are listed here. You can add even nanotubes to produce large quantity of electricity. But the key thing is there are 4 different phases: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. It's the beta phase which is one which is responsible for the piezoelectric characteristics, as I will show you. It also shows polling as a function of temperature, and also if you stretch and compress, it produces electricity, as is shown in this slide. These are some of the PVDF characteristics, very well known, very well documented in literature. So after we have produced PVDF, we want to make sure that it has higher beta phase. So we obviously look through the FTIR and also through the Raman spectrum to make sure that we have the beta phase. And of course, that's the homemade apparatus where we can apply mechanical in terms of either compression, shear stress, or bending stress. And here are some of the characteristics of the application of that mechanical force. So what you see on the left is simply stress versus strain. That obviously shows, sort of a linear type of a behavior, almost linear, if not linear. In the second column, capacitance as a function of strain. So essentially, it's showing that it has a behavior that you apply mechanical strength, and then you get the capacitance, or simply change in polarization. We also have looked into several different characteristics in terms of dielectric constant. Because these nanofibers have pores, so most of the time the characteristics in terms of temperature of the real and imaginary dielectric constant are not as normal dielectrics would provide, because of the fact that it depends on velocity. And also I'll show you that we also did temperature, frequency dependence. We also looked at the AC conductivity. So we tried to characterize a large number of these fibers to understand, and simply based on the porosity, we could look at different types of characteristics. But very recently we started adding to PVDF different types of materials which can enhance the beta phase. And one of the materials which we are using is PCT. Then we also added lead, and I'll show you a couple of slides where we had used PL-2 into these nanofibers. Also, we have done barium titanate, lithium niobate. Of course, PVDF is the one, and lead magnesium niobate, which is PMMPT. That's supposed to have by far the highest beta phase induction. But the point is, this is in a crystalline phase, so it's very difficult to incorporate. And this is, at the present time, this is what we are trying to introduce. We are also trying to see those who have done processing. There is a process called Deluge's method, where you have different parameters, and you try to see how you could optimize parameters with the given material characteristics. So we're trying to optimize these two to see which material would provide us the highest beta phase, so that we have higher piezoelectric, or essentially energy generation using these materials. So again, bunch of characteristics using PVDF, PL-2 nanoparticles. Again, it shows the beta phase, and again, different types of characteristics in terms of temperature versus dielectric constant. The AC conductivity, and so forth. So, based on these parameters, and I believe there was another presentation yesterday where the gentleman had tried to characterize the figure of merit. So we are trying to see the figure of merit of these materials essentially to see their functionality, how efficient they are for energy generation types of application. So what you see in this slide is different types of figure of merit in terms of its generation of the energy harvesting, voltage responsivity, detectivity, and so forth. And again, like I said, these calculations are in progress to see how we could generate more and more energy based on these membranes. So with this as background, now we move into combining these two. So this simply shows a schematic of 3D printing and electrospinning, and simply by layer assembly in terms of the time and also the frequency, we can make different types of scaffold using a combination of these two processes. Again, these are some of the scaffold which are shown using combination of these two processes. During COVID time, we were making N95 masks using combination of these two processes. And essentially that's the time when we saw that there were multiple applications. So this slide comes from the time of COVID-19 when we made different types of masks using electrospinning and 3D printing. Again, it has multiple applications. Some of the applications came from the military, asking us if we could make wearable kidneys, water desalination plant membranes, water purification, different types of applications as are listed in here. So based on this process, obviously there's lots of demand for different types of water filtration application. So I'm going to show you 2-3 applications. Again, as I mentioned, this is a subject with lots and lots of application. This is the work which, as I mentioned, that we conduct in Russia, making different types of membranes, and these membranes we can insert into critical infrastructure and monitor the integrity of the structure at a remote location. A typical device is shown on the top left, where we have a O-ring and where we place a sensor, and these sensors are placed at different locations in dams, bridges, buildings, so that they can be monitored continuously. In terms of biomedical application, some of the application, because of the fact as a function of vibration, it produces a signal, so we are using that for infant cardiovascular monitoring, pediatric dynamometer, respiratory rate monitor, measurement of prostate gland stiffness, especially for men, quantification and detection of articulate cartilage softening, catheter positioning, posture positioning. So all of that is possible using a combination of electrospinning with the energy harvesting application and of course 3D printing. So again, I think this slide I had shown before, that some of the biomedical application membranes which we have prepared, especially for the statin placement, they did not have mechanical rigidity. Now we have that capability, so we can do better than what we had done before. And this is the work which is done in Turkey. So we also have capability of making different, using 3D printing, different types of human physical augmentation, such as prosthetic arm. But one of the key things is that, especially at the elbow joint or in femur, there is, you need to provide lubrication. So we can impregnate the membranes with tungsten, which provides necessary lubrication. So simply the combination of 3D printing and electrospinning, we can provide that capability. Again, this simply shows spectrum of application. And on the right, we had provided a prototype for wearable smart sensor ring to monitor hand tremors people, for one reason or the other, have different types of tremors, maybe because of nervousness or because of age. So we have now a working prototype which indicates us the onset of those types of tremors, which can be monitored remotely. So that's functional. Okay, so I'm going to show you one application which is for energy harvesting. Because of the fact I have an International Clean Water Institute, so I'm going to show you that we can, based on cactus, simply we can monitor the cactus. As you know, cactus can survive harsh desert condition. It's because of the fact that the atmosphere has lots of water. So using 3D printing, we can create these cactus types of needle and then make hydrophobic membranes using electrospinning. A combination of these two we can combine for energy harvesting types of applications. So this is an interesting project which is in progress, and of course it has shown tremendous amount of progress. As I mentioned, lots of applications are there. It's very limited time. I can only show you a few of them. We also work on the looking at the fact that nanomaterials have negative index of refraction. This is for military because they wanted us to produce fabric which becomes transparent to optical radiation. So essentially making the soldier invisible. So we have this project also in progress. Another project is on different types of nanotaggants, looking at different types of chemical, biological agents in the environment, so they can embed that also in nanofibers. I think I'm running short of time, so probably I should. One of the courses which I teach is on a cytophysical system, and what I have shown is consistent with having different IoTs and how you could interconnect with the computer to see enhance situational awareness. So the idea is to have a digital twin. What that simply means is that for a larger structure, you could recreate a smaller digital version of it. And that tells you essentially the advantage or disadvantage of a system, how you could construct a larger system, and what one can do to sort of optimize. So having large IoTs provides us this capability. So this is one of the projects also is to create digital twins based on psychophysical system and IoTs, obviously to have a, better future for ourselves. So we are trying to reduce the polymers, and we're trying to use biopolymers to see if we can reduce the impact of polymers on the environment, which is also consistent with the current market segment. Most of the companies are now producing biopolymers, so we're trying to see if we can shift from fossil-based polymers to nature-based polymers to see if we can reduce the environmental impact. And I think this is the conclusion, which you could read. I'll save time for Q&A, and I'll have just one more slide after this. This is our institute. So this is a conference which we are organizing in Orlando next year. And we would love to have you here for this conference. This is essentially on dielectrics, but dielectric is a very general term you can use for any types of application. So if you are interested, you can contact me. The website is listed there. So with that, we can go back to the conclusion, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Professor for the very nice, excellent presentation with a huge amount of information in different areas. Questions? We have time for one question, please, Professor.
was a bird's eye overview of this fascinating topic for which I am grateful. I would like to link two issues which you mentioned. From the very beginning, I was impressed by nanotubes filled with high-TC superconductors. They seem to be very promising. But can you or your colleagues fabricate nanotubes using 3D electrospinning, which you presented in the main body of your talk? Can these two issues be joined? Thank you.
Good question. The two can be joined. We can introduce carbon nanotubes into electrospun nanofibers for mechanical strength. We have done that experiment and we saw that it increases mechanical rigidity. But at the same time, you have to introduce only a finite fraction. After that, they tend to come out of the network if you introduce too much. Also the fact that if you have carbon nanotubes which are not functionalized, they also tend to come out of the structure. So we have to functionalize to make sure they stay embedded into the circuit. So we have done that experiments quite some time ago, adding single and multiple carbon nanotubes when they are all functionalized, but also in very small quantities, because larger quantities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you once again. Dear colleagues, we have 15 minutes for work, 5 after 11.
To introduce my co-chair, I think you know both of us from the talks.
Yes, both of us are co-chairing this session. Glad that you're back. So with that, I'll give it to you.
Yes. And it gives me great pleasure to announce the first talk. The first talk is entitled Brain-like Artificial Neural Networks Based on Superconducting Neurons and Synapses. The talk is given by Anatoly Sidorenko from Moldova. We are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your introduction.
So, dear colleagues, in my talk, I would like to present results of our last decade activity in functional nanostructures preparation, especially for the new area for superconducting spectromics, especially the base elements for artificial neural networks based on such functional structures, artificial neurons and artificial synapses. This activity was done in frame of several projects. One of them 3 years European project Horizon 2020 program, SPINTE. We were coordinators of this project, and 2 partners, one Stockholm University, Professor Krasnov, another partner, Professor Volvo, University of Twente, and we had also national program. Priority number 5 in Moldova Republic is nanotechnology, and in frame of this priority program, project of superconducting base elements for spectromics. The result is the many years collaboration with, as I mentioned, in frame of project SPINTE, Sweden and Poland, but previously 20 years we collaborate with Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, where 10 years I worked, and we have with Professor Horst Hahn very tight collaboration in various projects, DFG, BMBF, Humboldt Foundation, Volkswagen Foundation. That's why a long history of collaboration with Professor Horst Hahn and Professor Thomas Schiller from Karlsruhe University, and Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, Bernhard Keimer from Max Planck Institute. He was here 2 times and presented our initial results devoted to spin polarized neutron reflectivity to detect spin configuration of our nanostructures. Nanostructures we prepare here and investigate in Karlsruhe and in Stuttgart. We collaborate with theoretician Professor Lukenchuk, University of Amiens. He was also many times in the frame of his MELON project, which devoted to artificial intelligence and artificial neural networks. We have many years collaboration with Professor Leonardo Gerov. We worked together 3 years in Germany, and then he developed theory of non-uniform superconductivity as base for elaboration of functional nanostructures. With Professor Mikhail Kupriyanov at Moscow State University, he is well-known expert in Johnson effect, especially Johnson junctions like artificial neurons, theory elaboration. And Professor Alexander Lavrashov, he is expert in modeling of technological process. Vacuum technology, as Professor Bauer presented in his talk, you can imagine it is time-consuming activity, and to save time before deposition, you shall make modeling of the process to optimize the process and then to develop the technology based on modeling. What I will speak about, this is a short outline of my talk, motivation of the work, why it is necessary to develop artificial neural network, and especially superconducting network. Some examples already existing in the working artificial neural networks, and I will explain why it is necessary to introduce superconducting-based elements. Then there are some new phenomena which were predicted by theoreticians who are working in tight collaboration with us. This is Professor Tugirov, who I mentioned already, Professor Kubriyanov, Professor Golubov. They elaborated non-uniform superconductivity 2 types, Larkin-Ovchinin full-differential type, implemented to hybrid structures, and triplet superconductivity as base for triplet spin web as neuron structure. Then technology which we elaborated for realization such effects, to detect such effects, it's necessary to prepare special functional nanostructures. And some examples of prepared artificial neurons, artificial synapses, and conclusion where I know where I'm going. You know this famous leaf. I know where I'm going. And I know who I love. We love superconductivity, and we know where we're going. Good. The development of semiconductor microelectronics, it was a revolution. It was exponentially increasing of capability of semiconductor chips, which were invented only 4 decades ago, but followed empirical more and more, exponential increasing number of single transistors, exponential decreasing of single element well, pointer one cannot see, but on the right column you can see how rapid was decreasing of the size of single transistor, starting from several micrometers in 1971 as it was prepared first MOS chips, down to 7 nanometers and even 5 nanometers. It is nowadays the more law doesn't work anymore. It is plateau because we reached natural limit of further reduction. When we have only several atomic layers of semiconductor, then it is clear that we nearly reached the natural limit of further miniaturization. And number of transistors now in the core of my notebook is something like nearly 1 million single transistors. Now the problem is not the further increasing of number of transistors, but problem is heating. When a notebook is vacuumed, you can feel how hot it is. That's why the limitation of the further development of the semiconductor electronics is huge energy consumption. You can see here in the slide one of 700 database centers of Facebook. Facebook has all over the world a lot of such data centers. One of them is placed in Sweden, where we worked in frame of our project, near Polar Kreis, the state Luleå in Sweden, with red arrow you can see. This is above Polar Kreis. Why? It is clear why. Because the average temperature is 0 Celsius. That's why the cooling will be more effective, because this data center, you can see the energy consumption 120 megawatt. This data center needs 9% electricity of the whole country, Sweden. The rich and industrial developed country, Sweden, gives 9% of electricity for only one data center. It is clear that further increasing energy consumption of semiconductor computers is not possible, because the climate, it is also overloading of our atmosphere with unnecessary heating. That's why it is clear that we shall go from evolutionary development of semiconductor computers to another revolutionary step to use another architecture. This is Turing machine. This construction of this computer was based on the works of Hungarian mathematician von Neumann. He worked in Princeton, but originally he originated from Hungary. In 1947, he proposed architecture and algorithm of computers which are working till now. All our notebooks and computers and data center from Facebook and other data centers are working based on architecture from Neumann. Now this architecture exhausted its possibility, and one shall use another architecture, and it is clear that one natural architecture which was constructed by God or nature, it is our brain. Our brain has non-von Neumann architecture. the many milliards of neurons. Neuron, it is non-linear switching element, are connected with synapses. Synapses is a linear connecting element, which show the role of synapse is to change weight of the signal transmitted from one neuron to another, to change weight of the connection between neurons. That's why we, in our brain, we have two main base elements, neuron and synapse. And they are connected in natural neuronal network, which works very effective. You can compare 120 megawatt, this computer based on fundamental architecture, and only 20, this is maximum, 20 watt, our brain, as we students are here, when they are preparing to examination, then they feel, oh, hot? It means that up to 20 watt, more, even a very classic, a very hard-working student cannot consume more than 20 watts. That's why it is clear that our brain is a very energy efficient computer, and that's why we shall try to construct architecture of new computer having for our eyes natural example our brain. That's why we shall construct using artificial switching element, non-linear element, which should serve as artificial neuron and artificial synapse for connecting them. And to construct perceptron or non-fundamental architecture, artificial neural network. Here you can see the successful realized example of artificial neural network. IBM company has brought to market in 2014 IBM 2 computer, which was constructed brain-like architecture. And on the right side, you can see the artificial neuron based on traditional MOS, metal oxide semiconductor transistors, something like 20 transistors. And artificial synapse for connecting these neurons. And on the left panel, you can see how they are connected in the core, and then cores are connected with the plate. And here one can see this computer, which here 16 neuromorph processor of true. Each processor has 5 million transistors, which imitate 1 million neurons and 250 million synapses connected with them. That's why this computer does work, and it is successfully used for traffic organization, for recognition of cars which made accident, or to recognition criminals. And what is important for artificial neural network, it doesn't matter the terrorist has Bart or Tariq. This system can recognize, because there are 18 points which are very, very specific. That's why it can recognize terrorists in the overcrowded square and to give alarm. And that's why this is useful system which already does work successfully. And very important application of such a computer is aircraft monitoring and operation. You remember that it was terrible catastrophe in Switzerland when it was fault of dispatcher, and he was tired after 2 days working, and he not prevented collapse of 2 aircrafts. Artificial neural network can work not being tired. That's why it is very important and very useful implementation of artificial neural network or such brain-like system. The problem is that once again to this slide where you can compare artificial neural network with this computer belt, which energy consumption 1000 kilowatt hours, and our brain only 20 watts. That's why it is still much more than our brain. Why? It is clear why. 5 million transistors, they have resistivity. 1 transistor only femtojoule, but if you multiply 1 femtojoule to 10-20 million transistors, then you can imagine that nevertheless the energy consumption of artificial neural network based on semiconductor elements is too much, and it should be reduced. One more revolutionary step should be done to change semiconductor element to superconducting. From its name means that it has zero resistivity in the base state, and as a result, zero dissipation of energy. Only it's necessary energy for cooling, but for cooling it is several kilowatts. That's why it is very small in comparison with 120 megawatts for semiconductor database. Okay. That's why motivation is clear to reduce many orders of magnitude energy consumption of the computer, and especially the artificial neural network, switching from semiconductor neurons and synapses to superconductor. So, but for construction of such devices, one shall use new ideas. This is artificial neural network based elements for INN or quantum computer will be the same. Josephson junction based on superconducting elements. The idea to use switching element was proposed many years ago with Alan Brook. John Brenner published in 1951, more than 60 years ago. He published the book Superconducting Creatron. It is, the idea was simple: superconducting wire surrounded by solenoid to switch magnetic field in solenoid to destroy superconductivity, and then from superconducting state wire goes to resistive state, and it is like transistor switching element. It is good, but the problem is critical magnetic field is several kilohertz. That's why the principle he demonstrated, but it is not attractive for application. Too strong magnetic field, and from all point of view, it is not present. The question was: is it possible to operate with superconducting element using not killer step, but several step. Several step, it is reasonable and it is easy to generate. The answer is yes, but it was possible after theoretical works, theoreticians who I mentioned already, Professor Golubov, Leonard Tagirov, Sebastian Bergeret. In last 2 decades, they investigated non-uniformity of the conductivity of loaf type, loaf plant material. Theoreticians, they proposed the non-uniformity of the conductivity in thermal, and it was modified by Golubov and Kupriyanov. They proposed the hybrid structure consisting of superconducting layer covered by thermal layer. Cooper pairs, superconducting Cooper pairs generated in superconducting layer penetrate through the interface to thermal layer, being influenced by exchange field. It will oscillate, and the thermal layer serves like Fabry-Perot resonator for superconducting pairing function. That's why changing the thickness of thermal layer, we can obtain maximum or minimum pairing function. It means maximum or minimum critical temperature. But mechanically to change thickness, it is difficult, but applying magnetic field or preparing two thermal layer with collinear or non-collinear magnetization. So it is Leonard Tagirov proposed such switching element, two thermal layer. If they have collinear magnetization, it will be suppressed superconductive. If non-collinear, superconductive. That's why switching magnetic field, we can switch this element. And this is our results. The curves is the prediction of the theory of Leonard Tagirov from swallow minima up to reentrance, changing the thickness of superconducting layer. We can gain all of these cases. And the points are our experimental results, and we detected reentrance behavior. That's why if we put a waking point in the area between 5 and 15 nanometer of this element, term is presented on the picture. Then, changing the mutual magnetization, we can switch from superconducting to non-superconducting state, and it will serve like non-linear necessary element. Here one can see the good resolution in Karlsruhe. This nice picture was prepared. You can see the high quality of these layers. It was special technology prepared because it is necessary to have a very clean interface between superconducting and thermal layer. It is the case that extremely good quality the interface between niobium and copper-nickel thermal layer. And one can see the switching from superconducting to non-superconducting. But okay. Then the theoreticians proposed that to use triplet superconductivity, then we don't need several hundred per step, but only several per step to incline magnetization. Because I told that it's necessary as low as possible switching magnetic field. And one can see that this is theoretical prediction of change of critical temperature of such element from collinear magnetization 0, non-collinear with 90. One can see that the critical temperature change, and technology elaborated in our Institute for Preparation of such structure is described in our book with Horst Hahn, me and Ivan Tiginiano. We in detail describe this technological process. This is usual labeled for Z400. This Arbeitsfeld of German microelectronics, but we have modified with several elements which were patented, which allows us to prepare very smooth and good quality layers. This is layers. This is the behavior of critical temperature of such element applying of external field. And this is switching with memory. And here one can see the switching from superconducting to non-superconducting state. And here it is the Josephson effect-based switching element. This is a Josephson contact with artificial fermion layer as big ring. And the high resolution SEM demonstrate this element. The sketch is above, and the real structure is on the film in Stockholm was prepared this. And this is the working characteristic of such neurons. One can switch from superconducting to non-superconducting state, and it can serve as artificial neuron. The artificial synapse layered structure which has so-called kinetic inductance. In contrast to non-superconducting metal, where we have only geometrical inductance, thin superconducting layer or thin superconducting wires have additional inductance due to movement of Cooper pairs. That's why superconducting carriers give additional term, kinetic inductance, which is dependent on the magnetization of layers. One can see the change of kinetic inductivity from parallel magnetization or magnetic layers up to anti-parallel. And the magnetic field for that is very small. You can see that from parallel to anti-parallel only 20 per step. Okay, 20 per step, it is quite reasonable, one can use them. And here realization of such artificial neural network based on superconducting elements and possible application for space investigation for internet and so on. That's why, as conclusion, we can use superconducting elements to construct artificial neural network energy consumption, which will be only several hundred watts. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. We have time maybe for 2 questions. Please, short questions and short answers.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned your presentation about this neuromorphic IBM center in which several tens of transistors work as a neuron. Yes? My question is about your superconductor ferromagnetic structure. One, this structure will work as a network, as a neuron, or as a transistor, and again it will be necessary to have several tens of such transistors to simulate the work of a neuron.
Thank you for your question. This is a big difference. Semiconductor neuron needs for its realization something like 20-25 transistors. But superconductor, this is a single Josephson junction. That's why one don't need many elements. This is a single person contact which works like a non-linear switching element. And the same artificial synapse don't need 25 threshold resistors, but it the kinetic inductance linear change from magnetization of the external field. That's why this is single element which will work as synapse.
Nice, but hard to believe.
It is possible. This is principle which was demonstrated, and then we can try to connect them.
Okay. Maybe one more short question.
Excellent presentation, which has lots and lots of application. So I just wanted to add one point that artificial neural network, as you mentioned, power consideration is one of the major factors. So the current trend is to move from cloud-based computing to edge computing, so that most of the computation is done right with the devices. And if you do that, not only you reduce the power consumption, but also increase the efficiency. So, you know, to your presentation as mentioned, the latest trend is to shift to edge computing, and that will obviously increase the speed. And lots of companies are working on it.
This was more like a comment, right?
Right, got it. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, no, perfect.
This is correct comment, and I agree with Professor Sister that it is not, it will not resolve all mankind's problems, but at least it will resolve the problem of the computer, which will work so effective like brain and so energy consumption. But for architecture of connecting them, this is the problem for IT technologists. Yes, this is not for physicists. This is to think about the connecting them in the network. It is another big area which should be also developed.
Thank you very much. We have to come to an end, and it gives me great. Thanks again for the presentation. And now it gives me great pleasure to announce the talk of Oleg Lupan, who works with us in Kiel since a long time. He has even an affiliation in Kiel, but he also has an affiliation at the University of Moldova here in Siciliano. His talk is entitled Engineering Heterostructured Nanomaterials for Nanoelectronic and Biomedical Applications. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Pavel. Dear guests, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee, to Professor Schotter, Professor Tiginiano, Professor Pereira, and the entire team who made it possible. This, even if it is difficult nowadays, but it was done, this conference and organized at high level, and I believe that the future or the next conferences will be even higher, because I'm really impressed how many countries joined this conference, highest level scientists and very good students. We have really nice students. So today I'd like to say about heterostructures and why now we join to heterostructure. Now we join this topic because it can be used for nanoelectronics as well as for biomedical engineering. You will see. So my name is here. My affiliation is Technical University, but we are working very closely with teams of Professor Pavel from Kiel University and Professor Adelon for the last more than 10 years after my Humboldt fellow in Germany, because I was jumping to US, to France, to different countries, but recently we are working really a lot here. Why? because if we want to develop some new devices, we really need new materials. And only Institute for Material Science, people who know very well this topic, and their teams can develop continuously new materials and can be integrated in new devices, tested, and so on. Why heterostructures? Always when I'm teaching to my students, I'm showing them results from different Nobel Prizes. For example, from light emitting diodes, recently blue colored from Japan, and one of most impressive Nobel Prize in Physics was for heterostructure, and it was really long time ago, developed by academician Alferov and Kromek. We can see it in 57, 59, but Nobel Prize was given in 2000. But at the base was the semiconductor heterostructure and first integrated circuits. Always showing images, they were not so perfect, but finally people realized that with such materials of such heterostructures can be developed information and communication technology and really high-speed optoelectronics and high-speed electronics, because now everyone wants to move already to optical computers, but still there are no devices. We can see that optical fiber already goes to the laptop or to the projector, but we still don't have computers which can work. So that's why in this topic I will explain about heterostructure and different applications. We are working on nano devices, nanotechnologies, at the Department of Microelectronics and Biomedical Engineering, who organized this conference, one of the organizers, Faculty of Computers, Informatics and Microelectronics. We explained to our colleagues, but in Moldova we had a really huge company. It was second largest in the world about microelectronics, so that's why this faculty and department was the main supplier of engineers for this company. We are working tight, very closely with Germany, with US, France, CNRS, and so on. Moldova is here, and we are really open for collaboration. Next. Technical University is the only high technical educational institution accredited by the Republic of Moldova, so it's something like École Polytechnique, which is considered the really highest level of education for young people. Outline of my talk, short introduction, engineering heterostructure. Like I explained, we need materials to make different applications for nanoelectronics and for biomedical engineering, and you can see that it is not so easy to split this. So that's why our department is called Microelectronics and Biomedical Engineering. About nanomaterials, now we can see that people are creating by themselves a lot of problems. So they are painting their houses, they are doing something, a lot of contaminants, a lot of evaporated gases and so on are coming. So now everyone is trying to use different types of sensors to protect, to check if their house is safe and so on. Also a lot of other contaminants which has to be detected. For biomedical engineering, a good trend now is how to monitor patient very closely, how to send information to physician or to send directly to emergency. And one of the ways to collaborate between different groups, now we can see that people exhaled air, they have different vapors, different gases and so on, which are related to different diseases inside. And by making nanosensors, we observe some good applications. So for nanosensors can be used a single nanowire, then it can be functionalized with materials, when it can be even added some biorecognition molecules to be used like biosensors and so on. It's a really large area of applications. So we explained that we need really 2D, 3D materials, nanolamellar materials, ultra-thin films, nanowire, nanostructure, and so on, and even combination of this. And to fabricate all these devices, we need to understand really growing mechanism, to understand how to control their morphology, structural, electronic, and physical properties, and in final, to use some different interfaces between them. Some results from our previous works where we observed that heterostructure or interface between different types of oxides can give different types of devices. For example, if we have interface between zinc oxide and iron oxide, we get a quite good ethanol sensor at relatively low operating temperature, but if we make this interface between zinc oxide and zinc aluminum oxide, then we have a sensor for methane. Next, we can mix it or to have interface between bismuth oxide with zinc oxide, already switch selectivity to hydrogen. With tin, we have carbon monoxide, and between zinc oxide, copper oxide, again ethanol, and these devices can even detect really low concentrations, so this inspired us to continue working with single nanowire, single tetrapods, but also with thin films and heterostructures. One of real application, for example, for a single nanowire, we can see here in the center of iron oxide, a single nanowire 20 nanometers in diameter, it can give a really good response to acetone, and can detect different concentrations of this acetone, why it is important to have and why it gets some attention. This type of devices of nanosensors, also it is some, because acetone is an extracted rare and it is related to diabetic, so we can use it to fabricate some detectors like this represented, and we can see it even on different websites. We are already selling different types of brief detectors, so we don't need to take blood tests too often. But this technology to connect a single very tiny nanowire, we already know, we possess it for many years, and not so many groups can do it in the world, but we can do it. Always we are trying to find an easy way to fabricate devices, materials. So one of it is really now everybody moves to 3D printing, so we can 3D print everything. And we started with copper oxide, just printed with Leo, a group of Professor Adelong, zinc oxide, copper. Then by doing annealing, we obtain the same very tiny nanowires, interpenetrated, and they are really good also for acetone detection. This work attracted a lot of attention, also in Kiel University, because we did joint work, and around the world you can see it in different websites. We are promoting these acetone sensors based on really efficient technologies, cheap technologies which can be scaled up to company level very easily. Also, we observed that this type of 3D printed materials, we can see in our corner, but they, when they are detached from the substrate, it can be even flexible. So it is another way to develop devices which, because really a lot of people now are trying to put it on clothes, on different flexible screens and devices. So it can work also in a flexible way, suspended way, and most important is that power consumption of such devices are really below microwatts if we do annealing with and air at 425 plus second annealing at 650. Power is decreasing really up to nanowatts. And at the same time, gas response is increasing for such type of structures. And it converts to copper oxide interface, so it's also like a structure. Another easy way which we developed is just to pick up microwire, copper microwire, fix it with some copper microparticles, do annealing, and we can obtain again a heterostructure, copper oxide, copper 2, copper in the middle, and also it works like a two in one sensor. For ethanol can be used at low temperature, and for hydrogen at higher operating temperature. If we take a look how it behaves in time, it's quite stable for a long period, and we are still functional. We still have these types of detectors. Next, we move to, we have a department developed one technology, even in my PhD, my habilitation, to grow by chemical deposition and very cost-effective way the different types of columnar, such types of columnar oxides, of zinc oxide, copper oxide, and next was the idea to cover this with aluminum oxide, for example, with the technique, which is a high aspect ratio and it can cover everything. Of course, raw materials, we can see that it can be controlled up to 7, even 3 nanometers down thickness, and we study different thicknesses of these types of devices. Of course, studied micro-Raman, studied XPS, and Professor Caulfield group, XRD, and other types of characterization for this. And we found that this material is really good to detect gases, but it's still not quite selective, but the highest response it shows to propanol in this case. Always we are doing in collaborations with team from Netherlands and England, doing computational analysis to try to explain what's happening with this absorption, desorption, and the interfaces, what's happening at the heterostructure interface, to explain all these mechanisms. And they added in our publications. I will not stop here, the time limit. Most important, we can see that such type of heterostructure has a really stable gas response and time. For example, in this case, is for propanol, 2-propanol. In cross-section, if we look, we have something like columnar structures covered with a tiny, a very thin layer of aluminum oxide on top. And with increasing thickness, we can get different values of the electrical resistivity. Next way how to make these heterostructure devices is explained here, so we can just deposit on glass or on any type of substrate, zinc oxide doped with aluminum, then cover with a tiny, with a thin copper sputtered layer by sputtering, and doing annealing we obtain another types of heterostructure, namely it's P, copper oxide is P type, zinc oxide aluminum N type, so we have a PN junction, and these devices also are quite selective, quite good for detection of butanol, so we can control different vapors, so we can develop devices for different types of vapors. But how to use the same device for detecting different gases, so the same technology for different, we did it in collaboration with Professor Caulfield group. They have a very good technique for deposition of nanoparticles of palladium, silver, mixed different concentrations, well controlled, and using the same structure. In this case is titanium oxide or copper oxide. Then adding different types of nanoparticles on top, we can exchange selectivity. For example, with palladium nanoparticles on top, we have a very good hydrogen sensor, which has really low power. We can say about 0.19 nanowatts. By coverage with silver, we change the selectivity of the same structure to butanol. And the same for silver platinum particles, and we can see that the power needed for these devices are really low, and selectivity is quite good for this structure. So it is another way how to make devices. Also, we observed that coverage of this structure with aluminum oxide gives a really good selectivity to hydrogen, and most important is immunity to humidity and stability and time. If we want to make a brief detector, it should be immune to humidity, because in our brief we have also large quantity of water vapors, and not only. But hydrogen is, I will show you later where we use also a more selective sensor with hydrogen for hydrogen, and high stable or immune to humidity was developed in collaboration with team of Professor Pavel with Stefan. He also is here. We covered this type of heterostructure with polymer PB3D3, and it shows really very good selectivity to hydrogen and no effect of humidity, different concentration of humidity. I will not explain all other characterizations which are doing there in our publications. Next, here we are doing the same tuning of properties, detection properties of these devices by using ultra-thin polymer fields. And I explained that this is very good to protect it from the surrounding. Also, it is very good to change selectivity. In this case, in previous one we had with PB3, D3 was a very good hydrogen sensor, but if we use another type of polymer, then it is a better sensor, better detector of 2-propanol, and quite selective. As you can see, even at 400, it is a very selective to propanol. Why we need this selectivity and immunity to brief, I just explained. For example, hydrogen sensors are, or hydrogen in our brief is related to some bacterial fermentation of sugar and intestines, and it goes to the blood and the brief, so it's very good to have a good selective sensor. Okay, then I go fast. Also hydrogen, now we can see in electrical vehicles. So one way developed together with between our teams and Professor Faupel, Stefan, he is covered roof polymers. Also it can be used for food spoilage detection, and as a brief. So if we have short time, then I will jump a little bit. We all now can see that everything is moving to electrical cars, but they are really dangerous. So sometimes during charging, hydrogen is released. It's very important to have hydrogen and hydrogen sensors. Also, batteries are becoming larger and much more power energy. So we are testing different types of vapors released with a group of Professor Radelon. all types and developing based on these heterostructure sensors which can be placed inside of a battery cell and detect, you can see different concentrations, quite stable and good. So jumping next, since time is limited, another type of heterostructure was just recently patented in Germany and published, so we can detect hydrogen directly in methane. You can see a problem with methane now, with natural gas, so people are trying to add hydrogen. This is what Professor Stock group and Professor Adelo and Leo, he always here, Panica. This is the framework of Horizon project, which we have together between Kiel University and Technical University of Moldova and another 11 universities listed here and companies. So they are all looking forward to have really good materials, good devices, final devices, which can be implemented. No time for next, but related to biomarkers, the biomarkers related to applications of PN junction to biomedical, to security, environment, healthcare, and so on. You can see in different works. We don't have time now to stop, but the field of applications is really huge now. A lot of teams are trying to develop, namely heterostructures for applications in biomedical field. I want to say thank you to groups of Professor Adelon. We can see it's really a large group and it's very friendly, and I am also joining. Group of Professor Paupel, thank you very much for, they always saying that everyone is involved in joint work and some nice research. So also our team at Technical University of Moldova, and I think today you'll go here. You can try to test some sensors whereby Moldova has the largest wine cellar in Europe and Moldova, so it's about 200 and also second largest one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was excellent. Covering from biomarker detection to hydrogen sensing. And now electric vehicles is not considered, it has been something else. So since we are running short of time, just two quick questions. One.
You proved once again that you can detect kind of everything. For the motivation, electrical cars burn approximately 100 to 1,000 times less probable than fuel cars. We all remember, for example, this ferry, where first there was a big press release, electrical car started the fire, but it wasn't. Most of the electrical cars survived, and actually I think there was only one damage. Wouldn't be a good idea, and could cause also turn now into a sensor for gasoline cars? Yeah. Benzene and so on, maybe a nice fingerprint.
We didn't try to get Thank you.
Any additional questions? Let me ask one very quick question. Since you mentioned biomarker detection, if you have multiple biomarkers, can you identify separately which one those biomarkers are?
This is the idea for our next project, because here a lot of different research groups, mainly in biomedical, engineering, biomedical, medical, they're also interested. And usually if we want to detect a certain one, I think we always need a calibration, something like a commercial sensor, so we can be sure that we are detecting exactly this one.
That's where the algorithmic identification becomes important.
Yeah.
They're using software you can identify.
Because also from computer sciences, we are interested to join our research to analyze all of this data, because when really a lot of data coming from measurements, it's difficult to analyze them. So we are open for collaborations, and also we like very much presentations of all people, all groups.
let's thank Professor Lindholm one more time. So the next speaker. Thank you. I forgot to say the last name, but thank you for it. And he's going to talk to us about the superconductor order parameters as inhomogeneous superconductors. So with that, Professor.
Thank you very much. Title is really ambitious. I'm just going to talk part of it. But first, I'd like to thank the organizers for having me to this wonderful conference. First time in Moldova, and it's I'm in Chișinău, so it's really wonderful to be here. The work I'm going to talk about is mostly done by PhD students and postdocs, which I introduced on this slide. Wendy Goose, Nyari, András Lászlófi, and Gábor Csira are the main powers behind the calculations I'm going to show. With Professor László Szúnyog, we are babying our code for the last 30 years, developing them slowly. Kuyungo Park from Virginia Tech is also a member of the team. She's working on new ideas with Laura. And Levente Ruja is our contact to experiments, mostly in Germany. When I was trying to prepare myself for this talk, I looked up what kind of quantum computers are there, and I came up with this extremely busy figure. So obviously there are lots of things going on, and you find words like the quantum gold rush. And I felt that I can't be left out of it, so with a friend of mine in Oak Ridge National Laboratory, we set out to solve a real simple problem on a quantum computer, 2 electrons in a box. This is a fairly easy problem, but we couldn't succeed. It was not possible to do this calculation on any quantum computer because of decoherence. The machine cannot hold information long enough. Currently, there are several kinds of quantum computers which are based on different scenarios. I can't really critique all of them, but ion traps, defects in solids, semiconductor quantum dots, and superconducting quantum bits are all present in the commercial market. But what I'm going to talk about is this topological nanowire. This is non-existent implementation of the quantum computer, but it carries the promise that we can make a topologically protected quantum bit which will hold information long enough so I can do my calculations of 2 electrons in the box. Quick introduction to Majorana states and topology is going to follow. I'm not going to talk about all the computational details which I just catch up here for those who can actually care about it. And we are going to talk about these topological zero-energy states, ion chains called Majoranas. Topology, you usually get some figures like this. You can set up these rings which can be deformed into each other in 3 dimensions, but you won't be able to do it in 2 dimensions if this dot acts like a pin. So in upper figure A1, A2 and A3 are all topologically equivalent. On the bottom B2 and B1 are not. This is a fairly useless concept if you want to discuss quantum bits. But I want to introduce you to a more useful one called bulk edge correspondence principle. If you have 2 topological phases, phase 1 and 2, and you put them together, there's supposed to be something special happening at the boundary. So what's that special? I understood when I saw this picture of a bridge going from mainland China to Hong Kong. In mainland China, there are normal people, they drive on the left, on the right. While in Hong Kong, it's a former British colony, there are strange people, they drive on the left. So if you would connect the 2 countries with a bridge, there will be a big crash. Therefore, they build the bridge which crosses over and rejoins on the other side. So the right lane becomes the left lane. So this is now our representation of a topological phase, on the, driving on the left and driving on the right. And now you understand what topological protection actually means. If you wanted to change this system, you have to convince all Hong Kong people to drive on the right, which is obviously difficult, and it's even more difficult to convince all Chinese people to drive on the left. Bringing this concept down to material science, I'd like to introduce the concept of band inversion. If you have a band structure, up figure, and you can associate with some kind of property with those bands, like polarization or being a D band or a P band, and they are completely disjunct, then you can color them blue or red. That's a topological trivial phase. But if there is something intermixing going on within each part of the band structure, it's called band inversion. And I'm just going to go into the notation that topological phase is associated with band inversion, which is not entirely true, but I'll restrict myself to this. So how we construct a topological band structure like that? The first clue came from Ettore Majorana, who wanted to describe fermions which are their own antiparticles. For that, he wrote the fermionic basis into the Majorana basis, and on the right-hand side, you see that with this basis transformation, he was able to achieve his goal. The Majorana quasi-particle is its own antiparticle. The second part comes from Kitaev, who was studying just the chain of atoms in this complicated Hamiltonian, but that's really simple. But when he wrote this Hamiltonian into the Majorana basis in a certain parameter space, he discovered that the atoms pair together in a different way, and the edge, there are two Majorana quasi-particles left out. And because it's indifferent whether they are there or not, they have to be at zero energy and at the end of the chain. So that's why this particle called Majorana states. This is a fairly interesting concept, so lots of people jumped on it, and there's lots of models, more realistic ones. And what we learned from all these models are that Majoranas at zero energy states, localized at the end of the chain, they correspond to triplet superconducting state, and they are sitting in a topological gap. Now, as a critique, the problem is that all these models use an unrealistic set of parameters. So we still don't know whether this is an exercise of mathematics or it has to do anything with reality. The best check would be is to do experiments. So experiments went out and they grew superconducting thin films or even just surfaces of superconductors, and they could put chains of atoms like iron and manganese on lead or niobium, and they went in with an STM and with a superconducting tip, and they measured the differential conductivity, and they found that at zero energy bias, they can scan in the whole energy range. At zero energy, they find a state at the end of the chain, each end. They also identified that these states sitting in a little mini gap within the energy range, but they cannot tell whether this is a topological state or not. And at the end of the talk, I will tell you how easy it is to get a fake state, fake Majorana state. So, in this situation, we set out to up the modeling and go to a much better description of the system, which I'm going to spare you. It's, we solved the Bogoliubov-Duhem equations by band theoretical methods. It is good because we can treat a surface and interface system with a perfect geometry. It can be material specific. We can input what kind of material the superconductor is. We can put impurity systems like atoms or chain on top of it. via Green's function embedding. Important because you don't have to use a supercell as you normally do in band theory, and but that wouldn't work in a superconducting state. If we just calculate the pure surface, this is mimicking an experiment of the Wiesendenger group. So they took niobium-110 surface and grew one layer of gold on top of it, and this is the calculation of the density of states, which is directly proportional to the differential conductivity, so it can be directly related to the experiments. And you see you get the superconducting gap exactly as measured. And then you can put a chain of atoms on top of this system, and you can calculate the density of states. There's two magnetic configurations we put in. One is when the moments are aligned ferromagnetically in the chain of 19 atoms, or when the magnetic moments are changing 90 degrees every time you go over to another atom. And in the case of the ferromagnetic chain, you see around zero there is some peaks at the edge atoms, but there is a big mishmash around it. But if you go into the spiral, 90-degree spiral, you notice that in the middle of the chain there is a mini gap, and on the orange curve, and at the edge of the chain there is a peak in this mini gap. Now I'm obviously at a visualization problem, because I would have to show you all these plots for every atom, which I cannot. So I'm going to add them up and plot them, the sum, for various spiraling angles, where I'm going to change not only 90 degrees, but any angle, going from 0 degrees to 180 degrees. The energy is plotted on the vertical axis, and the intensity of the plot is the value of the density of states. And here you can see that there is a mishmash going on up till something like 30 degrees or 25 degrees, and then a little gap opens up with a zero energy state right in the middle, and then the gap closes around 150 degrees, opens again, but then there is no zero energy state in it. This is for various angles. See, the 90-degree angle is right in the middle. 100 degrees means it's changing 100 degrees from atom to atom. But I lost the information whether this zero energy state is at the edge or not. So now I'm going to sit on the zero energy state and just repeat the plot for each atom. Atom number 0 is the first atom in the chain, and atom 18 is the 19th atom in the chain on the vertical axis. And then again, I have the spiraling angle on the horizontal axis. And it shows you that the zero energy state is sitting at the zero, around the 0th and the 18th atom. So it is a state localized to the edge of the atom. It becomes more localized there as I increase the spiraling angle. So whether now I have to look at whether I get a topological gap or not. And this is now I use a third representation of the figures. I just choose a state which is a spiral, which is 100 degrees, and I just plot the density of states for each atom in the spiral, 0 to 18, and I see that there is a very nice Willy gap there, and there is a zero energy state which is localized to the edge as it has to be. And if I choose another one on the top, which doesn't have a zero energy state, then I just get a mini. Now if I just plot the superconducting singlet order parameter, similarly like the density of states, I discover something. If you look at the bottom of the figure, you will see that the states at around 0 are just one kind, all red, and the color is the sign of the superconducting order parameter, so it has all the same there, and it matches the color which is at the band, the superconducting gap at 1.5, and this is the same on the bottom of the figure. But if I go over to the 100-degree spiral, which carries the Majorana, all of a sudden I realize that there is a premature change of color, and the color at the gap edge doesn't match the color at the superconducting band. I argue that this is a sign of band inversion. You remember this figure? If I project it down, I will get a similar figure as I showed before. Just when my postdoc was plotting it, he just plotted the other way around. So it doesn't really match the cartoon I downloaded from Manzel's paper. And this is just showing, this is the similar situation as I described before for the topological phase. We can go a little bit more deeper into this. What is going? Because this is the bulk edge correspondence, you remember? Your topological phase 1 is the superconducting surface. That's a topologically trivial phase. And your wire is the topologically non-trivial phase, which is being interfaced. At the interface, there is your something happening, and that's the Majorana. Now, to dig deeper, I just can't avoid to come a little more mathematics into it. If we solve the Bogoliubov-Dujan equation for energy value, just look at the bottom. At the energy value, it has a U and a V solution called the electron-like and the hole-like solution. And for negative energies, this reverts. You get the V and the U solution. But if for positive energies you see a reversion of U to V and V to U, that's surely the sign of band inversion. So we can come back to here and say that in the superconductor you have a solution UV, and when you get to the chain, where's the chain? When you get to the chain, it just changes over from V to U. So in the superconductor, you drive your electrons on the UV side of the road, and in the wire, you drive your electrons in the VU side of the road, and then you come back. And this is exactly reflected in the superconducting order parameter as I described before, because that is just the product of the two U times V. So I told you that it's easy to get a quasi-Majorana state, a fake Majorana. This is a calculation where I again put a spiral which doesn't have a Majorana state on it, and I perturbed the side atoms just by 5%. So potential on the side atom is just changed by 5%. And sure enough, on the bottom left figure, you will find that at the edge there are some interesting states which any STM experiment would identify as a Majorana state. But if you plot the superconducting order parameter at the right, now I hope you are well educated in this and you realize that the gap is not topological. So if I would try to make a qubit out of this fake Majorana, it wouldn't be protected, and I wouldn't be able to do my 2-electron in the box composition. So, stability of Majorana states can be examined here. I said that they are topologically protected, so now I just apply a perturbation and see how stable it is against the perturbation. And the perturbation is something like mimicking temperature. We create 18 numbers in the chain. We just create 18 random numbers, requiring the random number generator to give me numbers up to maximum value of 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 120, 172 degrees, and we apply to it. I realize that this is a primitive way of doing statistics, but this is mostly a demonstration. And you will see that up to 60 degrees, there's nothing, even anything happening. So as you increase the maximum value of this perturbation, you will notice that the gap starts to shrink. The topological gap is shrinking, but the Majoranas can be identified all the way to 120 degrees. And only about 172 degrees, which is the last figure, they are completely dissolved within the shrinking topological gap. How well does this identification of topological state works? This is a little computer experiment where I joined two spirals. On the left there is a spiral of 175 degrees, as usual, which is non-topological, and it doesn't have a Majorana. And on the right I have my usual 100-degree example, and there is that yellow arrow which I can move around, changing the ratio between the topological and the non-topological region, and you will see that the Majoranas are always happening in the 100-degree, the topological part, and this is completely well reflected with the superconducting order parameter on the bottom. You see on the left there's absolutely no topological inversion, and on the left, and as you go over to the topological region, this band inversion occurs all the way. And here on the right, the topological part is too small, so the Majoranas completely overlap, and they form bonding and anti-bonding states, and they move out of being at zero energy. I think everybody's keen to have lunch, so I skipped the last slide and put on my summary. I hope I convinced you that we were able to model these systems very well with our Kohn-Sham Dirac-Bogolyubov-Lejeune equation solver. I showed we found an internal topological gap and discovered that it can be characterized very well by the superconducting order parameter. They are at zero bias edge atoms. I didn't talk about triplet, but the theory can also work out what the triplet order parameter is, and I can report you that they prove to be a triplet. So all these indication points that these are really topological Majorana states, and they are robust against perturbation, and it's really easy to get fake Majorana or quasi-Majorana states. I'd like to close my talk with this question. Now the only question is how to make spirals. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Question?
Thank you very much for such modern
question is, you demonstrated the Mayudno film covered by gold and regular structure of iron nanoparticles. The crucial is that spin configuration should be periodically change its direction, non-collinear. Yes, and how crucial is that regularity, because it is not so easy to construct the periodic structure. If it is necessary, it is possible.
That's a very good point, and thank you for the question. That's why we were trying to perturb the regular periodic changing of angles by some random number generators. It's, I never thought about it, but your question, I have to realize that we thought it's a model of temperature, but not necessarily. It can be also a model of imperfections in growth.
Thank you very much. I have learned something really new about this quasi-Majorana states, and the question is, they occur in your model for a spiral arrangement. But can they be expected also for some other arrangements? I think, okay, this angle can be not 90 degrees. It can be very small, for example. What would be your vision in that direction? Thank you.
Yeah, you saw that the plot, which was showing the spiraling angle changing from 0 to 180 degrees in steps of, actually I think it was 5 degrees. So with very, and then from 15, oh no, it was actually 2 degree steps. So at 15 degrees, you actually start to get the mini gap to open. If you have both, if you have Majorana and some perturbation of the lattice, we didn't do that calculation, but there is nothing to stop us to do it now.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any additional questions? Well, if not, I'm sure all of you are waiting for lunch. So on behalf of all chairs, if I could take that liberty of thanking all the speakers and all of you for being here. With that, I think we can proceed for lunch. So let's thank